The low hum of alien chatter filled the nebulous veil, the most frequented cantina on Lucy's prime starport. Neon lights flickered against the dark metallic walls, bathing the bustling crowd in hues of blue and green. Lena Castor, dressed in a plain bartender's uniform, slid a drink across the counter to a towering reptilian patron who muttered a raspy thanks before slinking away. The cantina was a strange mix of chaos and order, where species from across the galaxy gathered. Some nursed their drinks in quiet corners, their heads low, while others laughed boisterously around tables cluttered with glowing glasses. For Lena, this chaos was a carefully orchestrated opportunity. Her eyes darted across the room, noting every detail, every movement. She wasn't just a bartender here, she was on a mission. She wiped a glass absent-mindedly as she listened to fragments of conversations, filtering out the mundane and locking onto anything unusual. The Ceranthe had been quiet for months, too quiet. Tonight might be her chance to uncover why. The cantina doors hissed open, and a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere followed. Conversations hushed as a group entered, their golden armor gleaming under the dim lights. At their center stood a figure who exuded arrogance with every step. Prince Calix Ceranthian. The heir to the Ceranthe Empire strolled in like he owned the place, his piercing amber eyes scanning the room with disdain. Lena's grip on the glass tightened. She'd read enough about him: arrogant, calculating, and dangerously ambitious. He was the kind of aristocrat who saw humans as an inconvenience rather than equals. Yet here he was, in a human-controlled starport, making no effort to conceal his disdain. Humans, he drawled, his voice carrying over the low murmur of the cantina. Still finding their place, serving drinks. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room, but no one dared respond. The prince's entourage flanked him like silent shadows, their hands resting on the hilts of their ceremonial blades. Lena forced herself to relax, adopting the easy demeanor of a bartender who'd seen it all. "Careful, Prince," she said, her tone light but firm as she set the glass down. "Even royals can choke on their arrogance." The cantina froze. All eyes turned toward the bar. A human challenging a Ceranthe royal? The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Calix's lips curved into a smirk as he sauntered toward the bar, his entourage trailing behind. He leaned against the counter, his golden insignia catching the light. And what could a bartender possibly know about royalty? His voice dripped with mockery, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Lena met his gaze without flinching. "Enough to know when someone's compensating for something," she said smoothly, picking up another glass to clean. Her tone was casual, her expression unbothered, but inside, her mind raced. She couldn't afford to draw too much attention, not now. The prince's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he laughed, a low, condescending sound. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that," he said, leaning closer. "But let me offer you some advice: know your place." Lena set the glass down and met his gaze, her voice steady. "Funny thing about humans, we have a habit of redefining where we belong." The prince straightened, his amusement giving way to something colder. "We'll see," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. It wasn't a threat, not directly, but the weight of his words lingered as he turned to join his entourage at a nearby table. Lena exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Calix was here for a reason, and it wasn't to enjoy the cantina's overpriced drinks. She needed to find out what he was up to, and fast. As the evening progressed, Lena kept one eye on the bar and the other on the prince's table. His entourage formed a loose perimeter around him, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Calix, meanwhile, lounged in his seat like a king holding court. His voice carried across the room as he regaled his guards with tales of Ceranthe superiority, each word dripping with arrogance. Lena worked quietly, her movements precise and practiced. She caught fragments of their conversation, most of it meaningless bravado. But then, something caught her attention. "The shipments will be delayed," one of the guards murmured, his voice barely audible over the din of the cantina. "But the disruption will cripple their routes." Lena's heart skipped a beat. Shipments. Disruption. Her instincts kicked in. The Saranthi were planning something that could jeopardize humanity's trade network. She couldn't let this slide. As she poured another drink, she slipped a small earpiece into her ear, activating a secure channel to her ship's AI. "Athena," she whispered, keeping her lips barely moving, "start recording. Focus on the Saranthi table." "Understood," the AI's voice replied softly, its tone calm and efficient. Lena continued her work, all the while piecing together snippets of the Saranthi conversation. Calix's voice was calm, calculated, as he gave subtle orders to his guards. They spoke in vague terms, careful not to reveal too much, but Lena's experience in intelligence work allowed her to read between the lines. As the hours dragged on, Calix's gaze kept drifting back to the bar. He studied Lena with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, his smirk returning whenever their eyes met. She knew she was walking a fine line. One wrong move, and her cover could be blown. Finally, Calix rose from his seat, his golden cape flowing behind him as he approached the bar once more. The room fell silent again as he leaned against the counter, his amber eyes fixed on Lena. "Tell me," he said, his voice smooth, "what's it like, serving drinks to your betters?" Lena tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Depends on the customer," she said, sliding a drink his way. "Some are polite. Others, well, they make the job interesting." Calix chuckled, taking the glass but not drinking. "Interesting. That's a word for it." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're not just a bartender, are you?" Lena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm whatever the job requires me to be," she said lightly. "Tonight, it's a bartender." "Why? Are you hiring?" Calix studied her for a moment longer, then smiled. "Perhaps." He straightened, his smirk firmly in place as he turned to leave. "Enjoy your evening, bartender." Lena watched him go, her mind racing. He suspected something, but how much did he know? And more importantly, what was his endgame? As the cantina returned to its usual chaos, Lena slipped into the back room, her expression grim. "Athena," she said softly, "analyze the recordings. Cross-reference with Saranthi trade routes and report any anomalies." "Processing," the AI replied. Lena leaned against the wall, her mind already working through the possibilities. Whatever the Saranthi were planning, she needed to stop it. And if Calix thought he could outmaneuver her, he was in for a rude awakening. For now, though, she had to play her role. The galaxy might see her as a bartender, but Lena Castor was so much more, and Prince Calix was about to find out the hard way. The back room of the Nebula's Veil was far quieter than the bustling cantina. Lena leaned against the cold, metallic wall, her arms crossed as the dim glow of a small console illuminated her face. The sleek device displayed Athena's findings from the overheard Saranthi conversation. As each word scrolled across the screen, the weight of their implications grew heavier. "Confirmed," Athena's soft, calm voice murmured in her earpiece. "Intercepted dialogue aligns with recent Saranthi fleet movements. Likely target, Corridor 7 trade route. High probability of sabotage." Lena's jaw tightened. Corridor 7 wasn't just a strategic artery for human commerce, it was a lifeline for dozens of colonies. If the Saranthi succeeded in disrupting it, the economic fallout would ripple across the galaxy, eroding humanity's hard-won foothold. "Time frame?" Lena asked, keeping her voice low. She glanced at the door, ensuring no one was nearby. 20 to 36 hours based on current trajectories, Athena replied. Not much time. Lena needed a plan, and fast. She pushed off the wall and returned to the bar, slipping seamlessly back into her role. The cantina was still lively, though a subtle tension lingered in the air. Calix's entourage remained at their table, their golden armor catching the neon light. Calix himself lounged with infuriating ease, swirling a glowing blue drink in his hand as if the fate of millions wasn't hinging on his whims. Lena busied herself with refilling glasses, all the while keeping an eye on the Saranthi group. They weren't speaking openly anymore, but their body language spoke volumes. Two guards exchanged brief, furtive glances before one slipped out the door, his movements calculated. Lena's instincts flared. She slid a tray onto the counter and nodded toward one of the other bartenders. "Cover for me," she said casually, not waiting for a reply. Her steps were quick but measured as she followed the Saranthi guard into the corridor. The hallways of the starport were dimly lit and labyrinthine, designed more for utility than aesthetics. The hum of machinery and the faint echoes of distant conversations filled the air. Lena kept her distance, her steps light as she tailed the guard. He was heading toward one of the private docking bays, a restricted area. The guard paused, glancing over his shoulder. Lena ducked behind a stack of cargo crates, her heart pounding but her mind sharp. When she peeked out, he had resumed his pace. She tapped the earpiece. "Athena, patch into docking bay 12 security feed. I need eyes." "Accessing now," Athena responded. Visuals acquired. One Saranthi frigate docked. No immediate signs of cargo activity. Lena frowned. Why dock a warship here of all places? Lucy's prime was neutral territory, openly flaunting a Saranthi frigate was a provocative move. "Keep recording," she whispered before stepping back toward the cantina. She couldn't risk confrontation yet. If the guard reported anything suspicious, it could jeopardize her cover. Back at the bar, Calix was waiting. He sat at the counter now, his golden insignias gleaming under the lights. A predatory smile curved his lips as Lena approached, her expression carefully neutral. "Ah, there you are," he said, his tone dripping with faux warmth. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your post." "Just making sure everything's running smoothly," Lena replied, setting a fresh drink in front of him. "What can I do for you, Your Highness?" He chuckled, the sound low and condescending. "Your wit is as sharp as your service. I must admit, you're intriguing." Lena raised an eyebrow, keeping her tone light. "I'll take that as a compliment." "Do," Calix said, leaning forward slightly. "But tell me, do you often take such an interest in your patrons? Or is it just me?" Lena's smile didn't waver. "You're hard to ignore." Calix studied her, his gaze lingering longer than she liked. "You remind me of someone," he said after a moment. "Someone I met during a skirmish on Vega 9. A human commander. Sharp tongue, sharper mind. You wouldn't happen to know her, would you?" Lena's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression unreadable. "I'm just a bartender," she said smoothly. "I wouldn't know anything about military skirmishes." "Of course not," Calix said, his smirk returning. "But it's fascinating, isn't it? The way humans fight. So desperate. So determined to prove they belong in a galaxy that's far beyond them." Lena's hands stilled for a fraction of a second before she resumed polishing a glass. "Desperation can be a powerful motivator," she said lightly. "It's amazing what people can achieve when their backs are against the wall." Calix laughed, a genuine sound this time. "Well said. Perhaps there's hope for your species yet." Lena met his gaze, her smile sharp. "We're full of surprises." As the evening wore on, the cantina began to empty. Calix's entourage remained, their presence a constant reminder of the tension simmering beneath the surface. Lena caught snippets of their quiet conversations, enough to confirm that the Corridor 7 operation was proceeding as planned. Her mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. She couldn't confront Calix directly, not without jeopardizing her cover and risking an interstellar incident. But she could gather enough evidence to alert the Coalition and buy humanity time to counter the Saranthi's move. She tapped her earpiece again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Athena, compile all recorded data and encrypt it. Prepare for transmission." "Understood," Athena replied. Just as Lena finished the command, one of Calix's guards approached the bar. He was tall, even by Saranthi standards, and his expression was unreadable. "The prince requests your presence," he said, his voice curt. Lena's pulse quickened, but she nodded. "Of course," she said, keeping her tone steady. She followed the guard to the private lounge where Calix waited, seated on a plush chair with a drink in hand. The room was quieter than the main cantina, the ambient noise replaced by a low hum of privacy shields. "Join me," Calix said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second before sitting, her posture relaxed but her mind on high alert. "You're an interesting one," Calix said, his amber eyes studying her. "You play your role well, but I can't help but wonder, what lies beneath the surface?" Lena met his gaze, her expression calm. "Just a bartender trying to do her job." Calix's smirk deepened. "If you say so. But tell me, bartender, what would you do if you were in my position? If you had the power to reshape the galaxy?" Lena tilted her head, considering her words carefully. "I'd make sure I wasn't underestimating anyone," she said evenly. "Power is fleeting. The galaxy has a way of humbling those who think they're untouchable." Calix's expression flickered for a moment, his smirk faltering. Then he laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You really are fascinating," he said. "I'll be watching you, bartender." "Closely." Lena forced a smile, her mind racing as she left the lounge. Calix suspected something, but how much? As she returned to the bar, she made a silent vow. Whatever the Saranthi were planning, she would stop it. Humanity's future depended on it. And Lena Castor wasn't one to back down from a fight. The cantina was quieter now, its earlier energy reduced to a low murmur as most patrons filtered out for the night. Lena Castor stood behind the bar, her expression calm, though her mind was anything but. The data Athena had compiled confirmed everything. The Saranthi plot was not just a rumor. It was real, and it was dangerous. She glanced at the Saranthi guards lingering near their table, their gazes darting around the room in practiced sweeps. Prince Calix was still in the private lounge, likely basking in his own arrogance. But Lena didn't have time to waste on his theatrics. Her mission came first. "Athena," she whispered, wiping a glass for appearances. "Transmit the encrypted data packet to Coalition Command. Priority 1. Include my tactical assessment." "Transmission initiated," Athena's voice replied in her earpiece. "Estimated completion, 120 seconds." Lena exhaled softly. 2 minutes. That was all she needed to hold it together. After that, she'd be working against the clock. The Coalition would scramble their fleets, but she still had to buy them enough time to act. Calix emerged from the lounge, his golden armor catching the faint light as he approached the bar. His entourage trailed behind, their expressions unreadable, their hands resting on their weapons. Lena maintained her composure, meeting his gaze with a polite smile. "Closing time already?" Calix asked, his tone light but laced with mockery. "Almost," Lena replied. "Last calls in 10 minutes. Calix chuckled, leaning casually against the counter. "You know, I've been thinking about our little conversation earlier. You're quite insightful for a bartender." Lena tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral. "Comes with the job. You hear a lot when people drink." "Indeed," he said, his amber eyes narrowing slightly. "But it makes me wonder, how much do you drink in?" His voice dropped a notch, his words carrying an edge of suspicion. Lena felt the tension in the air shift. Calix wasn't just testing her anymore, he was circling her, looking for cracks. She couldn't afford to give him any. "Enough to know when to mind my own business," she said evenly, sliding a drink toward him. "But if you're looking for something specific, Prince, maybe you should just ask." Calix studied her for a long moment before taking the glass. "Oh, I will," he said with a smirk. "In time." He turned to his guards and gave a slight nod. They began moving toward the exit, but something about their formation caught Lena's attention. It was tighter than before, more deliberate. They were protecting something, or someone. As the guards left, Lena tapped her earpiece. "Athena, track their movements. I need eyes on docking bay 12. "Already monitoring," Athena replied. "The Saranthi frigate is powering up its engines." Departure imminent in approximately 15 minutes. Lena's pulse quickened. If that ship left the station, the Coalition might not have enough time to intercept it before the sabotage operation was underway. She needed to delay them, but how? Her gaze shifted to the remaining patrons. A handful of aliens lingered at the bar, including a group of rowdy Tralexians known for their short tempers. An idea sparked, risky but her best chance. She approached the Tralexians with a tray of drinks, her tone cheerful. "A little something on the house," she said, setting the glasses down. "Courtesy of the Saranthi prince." One of the Tralexians, a burly figure with green scales, frowned. "Saranthi," he growled. "That arrogant lot?" Lena shrugged, keeping her tone casual. "He insisted. Said something about honoring the lesser species." The Tralexian's eyes narrowed, his claws tapping the table. "Is that so?" Lena leaned in slightly. "You didn't hear it from me, but he might have called you primitive." The reaction was immediate. The Tralexians stood, their chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Without another word, they stormed toward the exit, their muttered threats growing louder. Lena allowed herself a small smile. If all went according to plan, the Tralexians would cause just enough of a scene to delay the Saranthi guards. She turned her attention back to the bar, her next steps already forming in her mind. "Lena," Athena's voice broke through her thoughts. "The frigate's launch sequence has been temporarily halted. Disruption detected at docking bay 12. "Perfect." Lena slipped into the back room, activating her secure terminal. The display showed the frigate's schematics, highlighted with critical points she could exploit. She quickly formulated a plan to sabotage their systems without being physically present. "Athena, execute Protocol Shadow Strike. Target their comms and navigation arrays. Make it look like a mechanical failure." "Executing," Athena confirmed. "Estimated time to disable systems, 3 minutes." Lena's heart pounded as she returned to the main floor, forcing herself to appear calm. Calix was still at the bar, sipping his drink and watching her with an unsettling intensity. She ignored him, focusing instead on the Tralexians, who were now arguing loudly with the Saranthi guards near the exit. The argument escalated quickly. Voices rose, weapons were drawn, and the cantina erupted into chaos. Calix's smirk vanished as he turned toward the commotion, his expression darkening. Lena seized the opportunity. She tapped her earpiece. "Athena, status?" "Comms and navigation arrays disabled," Athena replied. "The frigate is grounded." Lena allowed herself a brief moment of relief before Calix turned back to her, his eyes blazing. "You," he said, his voice cold. "You had something to do with this." Lena raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Me? I've been behind the bar all night." Calix stepped closer, his tone low and dangerous. "Don't play coy, Bartender. You think I don't see through you?" Lena met his gaze without flinching. "I think you see what you want to see, Prince. But if you have a problem, maybe you should take it up with your guards." His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a loud alarm echoed through the starport. Security forces flooded the cantina, their weapons drawn. Lena stepped back, blending into the crowd as the officers moved to break up the fight and detain the Saranthi guards. Calix turned toward the scene, his frustration evident. He glanced back at Lena one last time, his expression a mix of suspicion and grudging respect. "This isn't over," he said quietly before following his guards out of the cantina. Lena watched him go, her mind already racing ahead. The Saranthi plot had been derailed, but the fight wasn't over. It never was. As the cantina settled back into uneasy calm, she returned to the bar, her expression unreadable. Humanity's place in the galaxy was far from secure, but tonight, they'd held their ground. And Lena Castor wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The starport's corridors hummed with renewed activity after the earlier chaos. Lena Castor slipped through the narrow passageways, her steps calculated and silent. The Saranthi frigate was grounded for now, but she knew that wouldn't last. Prince Calyx was no fool, he'd already begun working to undo the damage she'd caused. The clock was ticking, and she needed to act before he could retaliate. "Athena," she whispered into her earpiece, glancing over her shoulder to ensure she wasn't being followed. "Update on Saranthi movements." "Prince Calyx has returned to docking bay 12, Athena replied. "His guards are attempting to repair the disabled systems. Estimated time until operational, 30 minutes. Lena cursed under her breath. 30 minutes wasn't enough to alert the coalition forces and ensure a full response. She needed to buy more time, but how? The frigate's systems were already sabotaged, and another direct attack would risk exposing her cover. Her mind raced as she entered a maintenance corridor. Dim lights flickered overhead, and the air smelled faintly of engine oil. She paused near a service panel, her fingers brushing the cold metal. The starport's central power grid controlled every dock, including Calyx's frigate. If she could disrupt the grid for docking bay 12, she could delay them further. "Athena, patch me into the starport's grid," Lena said, her voice steady. "I need to isolate docking bay 12. "Accessing now," Athena replied. "Warning, disrupting the grid will trigger a station-wide alert." Lena sighed. "Do it anyway. I'll deal with the fallout." The docking bay was a hive of activity when the lights flickered and went out. Calyx's voice rose above the confusion, sharp and commanding. "What now?" he snapped, his amber eyes blazing as he turned to his chief engineer. "Another system failure, Your Highness," the engineer stammered, his silver scales glinting under the emergency lights. "The docking bay's grid is down. We can't proceed with repairs until it's restored." Calyx clenched his fists, his frustration barely contained. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was sabotaging his operation, and he had a sinking suspicion about who. "Secure the area," he ordered, his tone icy. "And find that bartender." Lena watched from a distance, her breath steady as she observed the chaos unfolding in docking bay 12. She'd positioned herself on a maintenance catwalk high above the action, her figure concealed by shadows. The Saranthi guards moved in precise formations, their weapons drawn as they searched the area. They wouldn't find her here, not yet. "Athena, how's the coalition response?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "2 frigates are en route to intercept the Saranthi fleet," Athena replied. "ETA, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Lena's heart raced. If she could hold Calyx here for just a little longer, the coalition would have the upper hand. But Calyx wasn't making it easy. He was too calm, too methodical, even in the face of these setbacks. He had a contingency plan, she could feel it. Her earpiece crackled as Athena spoke again. "Warning, Prince Calyx has dispatched a secondary team to the starport's central hub. Likely objective, override the grid disruption." Lena's stomach dropped. If Calyx regained control of the docking bay, his frigate would be operational in minutes. She couldn't let that happen. The central hub was a labyrinth of conduits, control panels, and data streams. The hum of machinery filled the air as Lena approached, her footsteps muffled by the thick grates beneath her boots. She moved quickly, her mind focused on the task at hand. The Saranthi team was already there, their presence impossible to miss. 5 guards stood in a loose formation around the main console, their weapons at the ready. A technician worked furiously at the controls, his scaled hands flying over the interface. Lena assessed the situation, her tactical instincts kicking in. A direct confrontation would be suicide, she was outnumbered and outgunned. But she didn't need to fight them. She just needed to stop them. She reached into her jacket and retrieved a small EMP device, no larger than her palm. It was a one-use tool, designed to disable electronics within a limited radius. If she could get close enough to the console, she could fry the controls and set them back hours. Taking a deep breath, Lena crept closer, her movements silent and precise. She stuck to the shadows, her eyes never leaving the guards. They were alert, but their attention was focused outward, scanning for threats in the corridors. They weren't expecting someone to come from above. When she was within range, Lena activated the EMP device and tossed it toward the console. It landed silently behind the technician, unnoticed. She pressed the trigger. The effect was immediate. The console sparked and went dark, and the technician let out a startled cry. The guards spun around, their weapons raised, but the damage was done. The hub was offline. "What happened?" one of the guards barked, his voice sharp with panic. "System failure," the technician replied, his voice frantic. "Everything's fried. We'll need hours to repair this." "Impossible," the lead guard growled. "The prince won't accept delays." Lena didn't wait to hear more. She slipped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. The mission wasn't over yet, but this was a small victory. Back in docking bay 12, Calix paced angrily as reports came in. His frustration was palpable, his sharp features twisted in a scowl. He turned to his chief engineer, his voice low and dangerous. "Status?" "The central hub is offline, Your Highness," the engineer said nervously. "We can't bypass the grid without it." Calix's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary sabotage. Someone was targeting him directly, and he intended to find out who. "Get me access to the station's security feeds," he ordered. "I want every camera, every sensor. Whoever is responsible for this will answer to me." Lena reached the cantina just as the Coalition frigates arrived. The starport's communication systems crackled to life, announcing the presence of the human fleet. The Saranthi guards in docking bay 12 froze as the Coalition warships loomed outside, their weapons systems powered and ready. Calix stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the incoming ships. For the first time that night, his confidence wavered. He turned to his guards, his voice cold. "Stand down," he ordered. "We'll withdraw, for now." Lena watched from the bar as the Saranthi frigate powered down, its engines going silent. Calix's entourage filed out of the docking bay, their movements tense. The prince himself paused at the exit, his gaze sweeping the cantina before locking onto her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Calix smirked, a cold, calculating expression. "This isn't over, Bartender," he said quietly before disappearing into the crowd. Lena exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. The immediate threat was over, but she knew Calix wasn't done. He would return, and next time, he'd be ready. For now, though, humanity had held its ground. And Lena Castor was ready for whatever came next. Lena Castor sat in her quarters aboard the Coalition cruiser Resolute, the hum of the ship's engines a constant backdrop. The dim light from her console illuminated the room, casting sharp shadows across her face. The events at Lucy's Prime still played in her mind. She had managed to sabotage the Saranthi frigate and delay their plot, but Prince Calix's parting words lingered. "This isn't over." She didn't doubt him. Calix was too methodical, too arrogant to let this go. The only question was how, and when, he would strike next. "Athena," Lena said, her voice breaking the silence. "Any updates on Saranthi fleet movements?" "Analyzing now," the AI responded. "Multiple Saranthi ships have converged near the Alara Nebula. Unusual activity for this region." Lena's brow furrowed. The Alara Nebula was far from major trade routes and political hubs. If the Saranthi were gathering there, it wasn't a coincidence. "Send the coordinates to the bridge," Lena ordered, standing. "I'll brief the captain." Minutes later, Lena stood in the Resolute's command center. Captain Darren, a grizzled veteran with a sharp gaze, listened intently as she outlined the situation. "If Calix is regrouping his forces in the Alara Nebula, it's not for a vacation," Lena said, her tone firm. "He's planning something, and we need to find out what." Captain Darren leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "We can't risk engaging them directly without more intel. A misstep could escalate this into open war." Lena nodded. "Agreed. But if we wait too long, we lose our chance to stop them. I recommend a recon team, small, covert, and fast." The captain considered this before nodding. Take a scout team and gather whatever intel you can. But be careful, Admiral. If they catch you, the Coalition will deny any involvement. I wouldn't expect anything less, Lena said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. The stealth ship Shadowfall slipped silently through the dense clouds of the Alara Nebula, its sleek frame cloaked against prying eyes. Lena sat in the cockpit beside Lieutenant Kor, a seasoned pilot with a knack for avoiding trouble. We're approaching the coordinates, Kor said, his voice low. Sensors are picking up multiple signatures, looks like a fleet. Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as the readings came into focus. Dozens of Saranthe ships floated in formation, their golden hulls gleaming even in the nebula's dim light. At the center of the fleet was a massive command ship, larger and more heavily armed than anything Lena had seen before. Athena, analyze that ship, Lena murmured. Design indicates a prototype, the AI replied. Heavily armored with advanced weaponry. Likely a new flagship for the Saranthe Empire. Lena's stomach tightened. If the Saranthe had deployed a ship like this, it wasn't just for show. They were preparing for something big. Lieutenant, keep us out of their sensor range, she said. We need more data. The Shadowfall glided closer, its sensors scanning the fleet. Lena's console lit up with streams of information, ship layouts, weapon systems, fleet movements. But as she pieced the data together, her unease grew. They're not just gathering ships, Lena said, her voice tense. They're staging for an invasion. Kor glanced at her, his jaw tightening. Where? Lena pointed to the map on her console, highlighting a sector near Corridor 7. Here. They're going to hit our supply lines, hard. As the Shadowfall continued its surveillance, Lena's earpiece crackled with Athena's voice. Warning, incoming communication from the Saranthe flagship. They are broadcasting on all channels. Lena frowned. Let me hear it. The deep, commanding voice of Prince Calyx filled the cockpit, calm yet dripping with authority. To the human coalition, your defiance has not gone unnoticed. You may delay us, sabotage us, even humiliate us. But make no mistake, your time in this galaxy is borrowed. Surrender your outer colonies, or face the consequences. Lena's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of intent. Calyx was daring humanity to respond, knowing full well the chaos it would cause. Transmit that recording to the Resolute, Lena said, her tone sharp. They need to hear this. The return to the Resolute was uneventful, but the tension aboard the ship was palpable. The recording of Calyx's message had reached Coalition Command, sparking urgent discussions about the next steps. Lena sat in the briefing room with Captain Darren and a handful of senior officers, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. We can't let this fleet reach Corridor 7, Lena said, her voice firm. If they succeed, it'll cripple our economy and morale. Captain Darren nodded. But engaging their fleet head-on would be suicide. We're outnumbered and outgunned. We don't need to destroy their fleet, Lena countered. We just need to disrupt their plans. Take out their prototype flagship, and the rest of their fleet will falter. One of the officers, a young strategist named Mara, frowned. How do we get close enough? Their defenses will be impenetrable. Lena leaned forward, her expression determined. We use their arrogance against them. Calyx expects us to cower, to play defense. He won't see a surgical strike coming. The battle plan was risky, but it was their best shot. Under the cover of a decoy fleet, Lena and a strike team would infiltrate the Saranthe flagship and sabotage its core systems. Without its command ship, the Saranthe fleet would lose cohesion, forcing them to retreat. Hours later, the Coalition fleet approached the Alara Nebula. Tensions ran high as the Saranthe forces mobilized, their golden ships cutting through the darkness like predatory birds. On board the Shadowfall, Lena checked her gear, her mind focused. The stealth ship slipped through the chaos, weaving between enemy patrols as it approached the flagship. Docking in 3, Kor said, his voice steady. 2, 1. The ship latched onto the flagship's hull with a soft thud. Lena and her team moved quickly, breaching the outer airlock and slipping into the massive vessel. The corridors were pristine and eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. "Stay sharp," Lena murmured, her weapon at the ready. "We're in enemy territory now." The team moved methodically, planting charges on critical systems as they advanced. Every step brought them closer to the ship's core, where a final explosive would disable the flagship completely. But as they reached the core, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "Admiral Castor. I was wondering when you'd show yourself." Lena turned, her heart racing. Prince Calix stood at the far end of the room, flanked by heavily armed guards. His smirk was infuriatingly calm, his golden armor gleaming under the harsh lights. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long," Calix said, his tone almost conversational. "But this ends here." Lena met his gaze, her grip on her weapon tightening. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing." The room erupted into chaos as the two sides clashed. Shots rang out, and Lena moved with precision, her team covering her as she sprinted toward the core. Calix's guards were well trained, but Lena's team had the advantage of purpose. They fought not just for survival but for the future of humanity. As Lena reached the core, she planted the final charge, her hands moving swiftly despite the chaos around her. Calix shouted something, his voice lost in the din, but it was too late. "Detonators set," Lena said into her comm time to leave. Her team retreated, the sounds of combat fading as they made their way back to the Shadowfall. The ship disengaged just as the charges detonated, a massive explosion ripping through the flagship. The golden vessel shuddered and broke apart, its fragments scattering into the nebula. On board the Shadowfall, Lena watched the destruction on the monitor, her expression unreadable. The Saranthi fleet faltered, their formation breaking as chaos spread through their ranks. "Message to Coalition Command," Lena said. "The Saranthi flagship is down. Corridor 7 is secure." As the Shadowfall disappeared into the nebula, Lena allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. And Lena Castor was ready for whatever came next.